นะโมตัสสะมะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะมะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะมะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังกุณุตรังอุปัชฌายังนัมมาสามิ You have to forgive me, my voice is not so strong this evening. Well, it's such a delight to return here to Nalanda and to see the progress that has been made since my last visit. And it's a very clear indication of the truth of that most basic of Buddhist teachings, that if you act well, you get good results. You act poorly, you get bad results. And this is surely a sign that you're all doing something very good and wholesome. And I feel a lot of appreciation for the efforts of everyone here in the Nalanda group, and especially Dr. Tan, who's told him this afternoon is the heart and soul of Nalanda, and maybe we'll just begin by encouraging you all to cherish him and look after him, and don't let him work too hard, and let him have more holidays, because we want him to stay around for a long time. So that's something that all of you can help out with. So I gave up. I took early retirement from all I lead a very lazy life these days. So very sort of in good health and happy because I have a lot of time for my own practice. But I do, and I have always considered the goal of Buddhist training, Buddhist education, as the welfare and happiness of self and others. So on occasions when I have visited Mahayana Buddhist communities, and of course sometimes there are misapprehension and misunderstanding of Theravada teachings, and characterized as, or caricatured, I should say, as we just want to get off of the samsaric wheel and not worried about anyone else, sort of the selfish arahant ideal. And I try to explain to people that the Buddha pointed out that if we don't know how to look after ourselves well, our capacity and stamina to help others is severely compromised. There are so many examples that I can think of in my life of people who have had very noble ideals and wish to devote their lives to the common good, and yet threw themselves into it in such a way that they burned out within a very short time. And this idea that it's the more that you give to others, the better. The less you give to yourself, the better, the more noble and it is, I think is a mistaken idea. So physically, you need to look after yourself. If you're going to act for the welfare and happiness of others in a sustainable way, long-term way, and we're not just talking about a year or 2 years, we're talking 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. But also the very meaning of the word happiness and welfare, these are very simple, everyday words that we've known since we were children. They have profound meanings, and our understanding of what the word happiness means and what the word welfare means is something that evolves through our own practice. But if we, also a very important point, I think, and perhaps you've seen this yourselves, is that when people are motivated to help others, but are not practicing the Dhamma themselves, and therefore lack that inner awareness and maturity, then they can very easily be caught up in the worldly dhammas that start to appear. If you are in any way competent and you start to achieve some successes, then praise and blame starts to become more intense. And if you have not learned how to take care of your mind, then praise and blame can play havoc with your emotions. And it's also the case, I think, that we all of us, I think, find it difficult to sort out our own problems, and it's often surprisingly more easy to solve other people's problems than our own. And sometimes helping others can be a substitute for helping ourselves and a distraction from it. So we need to be very honest with ourselves, and part of meditation is developing this inner honesty and inner integrity. So if you've been practicing meditation for any length of time, I hope you will have noticed that your capacity to lie to yourself and to deceive yourself has waned, has diminished. That should be a natural result of this inner effort, inner striving. But the lack of self-knowledge and self-awareness constantly undermines our efforts to help others in a wise and sustainable way. And often charitable foundations tend to be full of strife and conflict caused by attachment to views and opinions. And this whole area of practice does often tend to be a blind spot for many well-intentioned people, and I would say also for those who are practicing the Dhamma in I would say an overly technical way, or a path which is stressing formal meditation practice to the exclusion of other forms of spiritual development. So if you're, I spent many years in community, but I've also spent many years in solitude, and my observation is that in solitude, then you of course have a lot more choice over your style of practice, and you can put forth a lot more concerted effort without having to make compromises or be overly concerned with, for instance, the monastic schedule or responsibilities to others. So this like intense kind of retreat schedule of sitting, walking, which many feel this is the real practice, that they're really getting down to it and sat so many hours today, walked so many hours today. That's fine, but I would suggest that that kind of practice, if it's taken to be like the real practice and other areas of life not given the same kind of attention, can develop real blind spots, and in particular in the realm of ditthi and mana, and attachment to views and opinions and conceited ideas of ourselves with relation to others, for instance. So in doing a lot of sitting and walking, the hindrances become very clear. Sensual desires, aversions, negative feelings, sloth, torpor, laziness, mental agitation, worry, doubt. These are, the nitty-gritty. These are the things that you're learning to work with on meditation retreats. But it's much more difficult to work on attachment to views and opinions and conceit in that kind of environment. And this is why community life as should always form the balance to the devotion to formal practice. And people often will have a resistance to that because no matter how harmonious the community you live in, there's always, when human beings living together, there's always friction of some kind or another. And what is that friction? That's the friction caused by defilement. It's not caused by anything else. And when we're living with people who have different ideas of who we are to the ideas that we cherish, it's uncomfortable. When we have to contend with people who have reasonable ideas about things which conflict with our own, that's uncomfortable. And as meditators, we shouldn't shy away from that discomfort. That's very much part of it. And so the kind of training that I received and I tried to develop in Wat Nanachat, for instance, is giving monks the experience of solitude interspersed with periods of living in community, so that the kinds of work that you can do in solitude most effectively are addressed, and also the kind of work which is most effective in community is addressed. So there are different strengths and weaknesses of solitude and formal meditation and the practice in daily life, and they should also be seen as a whole and not as one conflicting with another, or finding that your mindfulness is not so strong in community and craving the next retreat where you can get back to the real practice. So today I'd just like to talk a little bit about what our practice is, and this in itself is significant, isn't it? Because any substantive talk about Buddha Dhamma, we really have to move into the realm of practice, because this is where it's made real. And the very question of practice, and what is practice? We have this rather unusual word. The way that we use it is not the way that it's used outside of the Buddhist community. But I would But I often reflect on this when meeting people in Thailand in particular who are of the view that they're not yet ready to practice the Dhamma. There are just too many things going on in their life, and when they're a bit older, things have settled down a bit. And it's just usually always something, just to put it off a little bit. So everyone is very keen to practice sometime in the future, but not so keen to practice right now. But what exactly is this practice that they are postponing? And what's the alternative? So, a common view is that I'm just sort of treading water and just getting by and making money and raising my family and doing something, and sort of in this kind of neutral zone. And then sometime in the future, I'll be in this place where I can really put some effort into practice. But I think that's a false or mistaken way of looking at things, that practice is basically what you do, how you act through body, speech and mind. It's kamma, in other words. So from the moment that you get up in the morning to the moment you fall asleep at night, you're practicing. So it's not a matter of you're in this grey neutral zone treading water until one happy day you can practice, and right now you're not practicing. You have a choice of practicing Dhamma or a choice of practicing Adhamma, that which is not Dhamma. You're never in a position where you're just not practicing anything at all. Because every time you open your mouth, every time you sit and you dwell on some topic in your mind, every time you act, you're creating karma. That's your practice. So your life is your practice. Now, one of my favorite words, and I think it's a very important word, and I think many of you will be familiar with this from your studies, is one of the epithets of an arahant, and it's the word aseka pugala, the aseka pugala. So is a negating word, and basically aseka means the graduate. The arahant is the graduate, the one who no longer needs the sikha or the training, one who has gone beyond the training, gone beyond the Buddhist education, Eightfold Path, no longer needs the training. He's graduated. Now from that, we can infer that all human beings, save arahants, are in need of training. And our life as Buddhists is characterized as a life of training or education, that we become truly human through this education. Sometimes in speaking with Western groups and even Thai groups and people who've been influenced by Western culture, you can get this question: what is the meaning of life? And it's one of those dud questions. It sounds when you first hear it, sounds really profound, but in fact, I would contend it's a meaningless question. It's like saying, what's the meaning of a tree? What's the meaning of this roof? Or what's the meaning of this microphone? The idea of there is something called a meaning over and apart of the thing itself. So I have a better question. I think it's a better question. My question is, what gives meaning to life? So, what is the meaning of life, as if there's some kind of special, profound answer. But what is it that makes us feel that our life has some meaning and purpose? And I would contend that the practice of the Eightfold Path is what gives life meaning and purpose and substance and groundedness and direction. So education, the training that the Buddha provided us, is what makes our life feel it has substance to it, it has meaning. It's not like there's some philosophical thing out there called meaning that we have to pursue. The meaning is how we approach our daily life, how we approach our relationships, how we live our life, and in particular, our actions of body, speech, and mind. So I had this, I think many of you may have elderly parents and loved ones. And my mother now, she's 85, she lives alone. I have a brother and sister in England who live quite close by, and they're very dutiful, and I would say compared, from the general standard in Western countries. But my mother spends a lot of time on her own, and she's a champion Olympic warrior. If there was an Olympics, she'd be in the running for a medal. So, and she thinks and dwells about things a lot. And one day she was feeling very depressed, a little tearful, and a feeling is like, I'm at this age now. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just a burden on the children, and basically, what am I doing? Why? Basically, my life doesn't have any meaning. And so I said to my mother, what I want you to do is every day, I just want you to do one good thing for somebody. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a small thing. I know you're living alone. You think, well, what can I do? Well, you can maybe even to phone someone up and say something kind, some small act of kindness, or for animals, or for birds, or for whatever. But every day, just this is your homework. I want you to do one good thing, one thing that after you've done it, you feel, yeah, that was a good thing. And this is what will give you the sense that, yeah, today was not a wasted day. Today was a day with meaning because I did something good. So this I feel is it's such a simple, straightforward answer. And people wrestle with existential problems of meaning, and it's not a profound thing at all. Goodness gives meaning to life. But there are many levels of goodness, and the path, the education provided by the Eightfold Path, it gives a more and more profound sense of meaning and purpose. And the essence of this path, as you know, is liberation. And the Buddha gave us this wonderful teaching that he said that if you have some doubts about the authenticity of teachings, then this is a very good criteria whether or not it leads and increases the amount of liberation in inner freedom of the mind. So in the famous simile, the Buddha said that just as if you were to taste the water of any of the oceans at any spot in the ocean, it would have that same salty taste. Similarly, the authentic teachings of the Buddha have this same taste of liberation. So let's begin with dana and giving and generosity, and apply that principle. So what is the perfection of generosity and giving, of dana? And it's that liberation from selfishness and from attachment to our material possessions. This is why the Buddhist path begins with the cultivation of generosity, because this practice of letting go of attachment is one that evolves and becomes more and more subtle and profound as we progress on the path. But we create this very good foundation for it. We create a familiarity with the letting go in the material sphere to begin with. We have something that belongs to us, and one portion of it, one part of it, we freely give to others with no desire for any kind of reward, whether it's a material reward or an emotional reward. And as a result of that, we feel joy. And that joy is a very special kind of joy because it never leaves us. It's what we call a noble treasure. So if you were to bring to mind an act of kindness that you performed in the past, even 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, no matter how long ago you performed that act, if you bring that to mind right now, you feel the sense of joy, you feel good. Whereas the kind of worldly joy and pleasure that you might have experienced from going on a holiday or some kind of sensual pleasure, as after that pleasure has disappeared from the mind and you recall it 5, 10, 20 years, it's a very mild kind of feeling, maybe nothing very much at all, feels almost like a dream. And so this is a way that we can put these teachings of merit and demerit and the difference between sensual pleasure and spiritual pleasure. All these things can be put to the test through our everyday experience. Similarly, if you've in the past, I'm sure we've all given offerings and made sacrifices, but with and which required, a renunciation of our wealth, of our possessions to one degree or another, and yet with some hope or some desire for reward. Now, after some time has passed, when we recall that act of giving, we feel nothing. It's as if we're remembering a transaction of some kind or another. So the long-term benefits of giving are stored, they're stored in our heart. They're noble treasures that no one can steal away from us. And what we're seeing right from the beginning is that when we do give something up, there's an initial, almost like a small death of the self. There's just that sense of anguish and grief of giving. But we go over that slight hump, and then there's joy. And we prove to ourselves, it's a memory, it's sanya of great importance. We know that relinquishing things that we'd formerly felt are mine and are important to me lead to joy and happiness. And so this is part of the emotional fortitude that we need to draw upon when we're being challenged to let go of attachment to the body, to feelings, to perceptions, to thoughts, to ideas, to beliefs, to views, to emotions. We create this first strands of emotional strength from the act of giving. Now, another aspect of giving is that just as through the inner cultivation of positive emotions and of the virtues and the bojjhangas and the enlightenment factors, we find that they naturally express themselves in our actions and speech. So there's this inner growth which naturally expresses itself in our relationships and in the world that we live. But what is perhaps sometimes overlooked is that there is the same movement from the outer to the inner. And through an act of giving, we change our sense of who we are. So if you give, you are proving to yourself that you are a giver and you have something to give. And this is why in the very poor villages of Isan in northeast Thailand, very poor people have a joy and a lightness about them because they are poor, they have very little material wealth, but they give. And their sense is not of, I'm someone who lacks this and lacks that. Yes, they do. I'll not be too idealistic here. But at the same time, they have this sense of, I'm someone who gives. I'm someone who shares. I am someone who has something to contribute. And as a conventional sense of self, this is a very healthy one. And this is how in Buddhist psychology, we approach this idea of self-esteem, or we create self-esteem through generosity and through precepts. So on this practice and this, I'm not going to go through the Eightfold Path today. I'm going through the three stages of dana, sila, and bhavana. Now, sila is absolutely central to our practice in Theravada Buddhism, and one of the inspiring features of the monastic order for me from the very beginning was the fact that the Vinaya, the monk's discipline, is one in which there are no exceptions for senior monks, or no exceptions even for enlightened monks. Indeed, it's a tradition amongst the forest monks in northeast Thailand that the great monks are sometimes even more strict than their students. The reason, or this beautiful custom can be traced back to the great ascetic of the Buddha's time, Venerable Mahakassapa, who, if you remember, was once invited by the Buddha to give up some of his ascetic practices. You're an old man now, you don't need to do all this anymore, basically. And Venerable Mahakassapa asked permission to carry on. He says, no, I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for future generations. So this is one of the sort of the Theravada Bodhisattva style. It's like you're keeping these rules, even though you don't need to. You could eat in the evening, or you could do all this, and it wouldn't affect your mind at all. But you don't, in order to be a good example to your students, and not just the students of the present day, but to those who've not yet been born. So it's the compassion for those, not just all sentient beings that are present in the world right now, but those that are yet to be born in the human realm. And the value of this is that meditators, monks, nuns, whoever, you reach a certain point in practice, and it all suddenly starts to become rather a lot more easy than it used to be. and most of the coarser defilements seem very weak or almost absent altogether. And this is a very dangerous stage of practice. You can easily become complacent. And of course, once you start to feel, well, I don't really need to do all this stuff anymore. My mindfulness and my samadhi is of a stability now that I could actually dispense with all of that. And then when you, as a forest monk, you think, but Ajahn Chah and Lumpu Man and all these monks, they were much further advanced than me, and they still kept all these rules. So how can I possibly justify myself relaxing them? You see, so this is how these teachers help us, even when they've passed away, through their example and through their integrity and through their refusal to relax their practice simply because personally they did not need to do those things anymore. So this tradition means also that you can, as a young monk, you can have a great deal of confidence in the teachers. So even if you're asked to do things that you don't agree with by your teacher, you'll know you'll never be asked to do anything unethical because the teacher has given himself to the Dhamma and the Vinaya. So you have a hierarchical organization, very conservative in many ways, but it's a very special hierarchical organization. Firstly, everyone is there because they want to be, and if they don't want to be, they can leave at any time. And secondly, that all those members of the hierarchy who are in positions of power voluntarily agree that their power be constrained by the Vinaya, and the lifestyle of the senior monks and like this robe I'm wearing, it's exactly the same as the robe I wore 40 years ago when I was first a monk. I don't have any sort of special trappings, or I don't have a hat, or any kind of any just exactly the same. So precepts offer many important advantages on the path, but I would like to just talk a little bit about the unique attitude to morality in Buddhism, and particularly in Theravada Buddhism. So in many religious systems, they postulate an all-powerful deity who basically decides what's right and wrong, and your job is to learn that, memorize it, and be obedient to it. And there is a reward and punishment system installed so that you're threatened with a punishment if you don't do what you're told, and you're tempted or inspired by a reward, a heavenly reward, if you do. So in Buddhism, it's a very different approach. So the Buddhist approach is always, start off right down at the basics, and a kind of question. Buddhism is a religion of questions. You're encouraged to ask questions. You're challenged to ask questions. You're expected to ask questions. And the first question is, in any kind of community, in a family or an organization or in a community, what is the most basic need that we all have? What is the one need that everybody absolutely has to have fulfilled? My answer here is safety. We need to feel safe, and if you're in any any situation, even if you're wealthy, you're well off, or you have access to teachers and profound spiritual teachers, if you feel in your personal life you're not safe, you're not going to get very far in practice of Dhamma. And if you feel that your children or your loved ones are not safe, then even more so. So safety is... So the Buddhist question is, how do we live together in such a way that everyone can feel safe? Okay, this is a really important question. So the Buddha's answer is to take the human nature. Again, is the absolutely characteristic of our tradition. And the Buddha points out that we cannot, as an act of will, decide to be virtuous, in the sense that we hear a teaching about loving kindness and compassion, and we're so inspired. So then maybe go and bow to the Buddha and say, from this day onwards, I will never get angry with my husband or my children. I shall just be full of loving kindness and compassion all the time. So it doesn't work, does it? I mean, but this is an important truth to bear in mind, that emotions and habits created over a long period of time, these do not just go away through the wish for them to do so. Even a very devout, fervent wish, it's not possible. But we do have a certain capacity to exercise our will over our actions and our speech. And this is our tool in the realm of ethics and morality. So the Buddha, one beautiful word he used to describe the keeping of precepts, he said at one point, this is mahadana. This is the great gift that you give to the world. So you announce to yourself and to your family and all those around you that, yes, I've still got dosa and anger. I lose my temper sometimes. I get angry. I get annoyed. I get irritated. I'm working on this, but right now that's how it is. But I promise you that I will never abuse you physically or verbally. Okay? So how do you feel when someone tells you that? You feel safe, don't you? You're not saying that person should be a saint and should, oh yeah, well, you should love us. You do love, you say you love me. So how can you feel negative? Well, you do. It's just normal and natural sometimes. But you make your stand. This is where you make your stand. Even though I'm angry, even though I'm irritated, even though I will never abuse you physically or verbally. And then you make an announcement, yeah, I have greedy thoughts. I have envious thoughts. I have acquisitive thoughts of, yes, I really like that. You see something that belongs to someone else, and maybe there's just this, oh, if only that was mine. If I had that. The classic kind of envious thought is, if I had that, I would be happy. So these kinds of thoughts can still arise, but you say that even though I have these thoughts sometimes, I will never take anything that does not belong to me under any circumstance. I won't cheat under any circumstances. So how do you feel? You feel great. You don't always have to worry when you put things down. I hope that's still there when I come back. It will be. And this is one of the beauties of monastic life. Even if you had something that was quite valuable, you put it down, and you just have to think about it. It will still be there when you come back, because no other monk would dream of taking something that didn't belong to them. So in the third precept, you say, yeah, I mean, maybe when you first fall in love, when you first get married, there's only one girl in the world for you and one boy in the world for you, but it doesn't really last, does it? And your normal human body and human emotions and sexual desires, and every now and again you see members of the opposite sex and you find them attractive and interesting, and you have some sexual desire arise, and that's not evil, that's normal. And you say, no, I will never have those feelings, and I'd never do that. Yes, you will. It's kind of normal. But you announce, even though sometimes these thoughts, these feelings arise in my mind, I will never act upon them. I will never speak a single word coming from those kinds of emotions. You see, so wow, if your spouse makes that kind of commitment. Wow, you feel so safe. You feel so relaxed, don't you? And you see this in families where you don't have that. And where is he? What's the time? What's the time? What's the time? And then it's, I've got some work late at night. Unexpected. You really, and who can I check up with? And just the way that your mind can just spin around, and one part of you saying you should trust him or you should trust her, and don't think so much, but you can't help it, can you? Because there's not that commitment to precepts. But once you have it, and then you're absolutely, you're not saying I'm a saint and I never have these kind of feelings or temptations or things, but it's not like Superman or Superwoman standard of behavior to say, no, I just won't follow that. I won't do that. And I won't lie. You don't have to worry, is that true? Is that false? Maybe you just don't lie. And sometimes when you don't lie, you feel embarrassed, and you have fears of that someone will lose their respect for you a little bit, or not like you so much, or even abandon you. But that's why keeping precepts is a spiritual practice in itself, because it's preventing you from distracting yourself and running away from yourself. And simply that fourth precept, it illuminates so much defilement in the mind, allows you to see these things as mental states rather than identifying with them. That's a really important practice. So these precepts, these are objects of mindfulness in daily life, basic objects of mindfulness. So if you say to somebody, okay, look, I'm announcing to the whole world, all family and everyone, that I still have a lot of negative emotions and defilements, and which are going to take some time to deal with. But in the meantime, I will never abuse you physically or verbally. I will never take anything of yours that doesn't belong to me. I will never cheat on you. I will never deceive you. I will never lie to you. But this will only hold true as when I'm sober, because when I drink, I'm not so sure that I can really. So then the whole thing falls apart, doesn't it? So this is why the fifth precept is so important, because you can only keep that kind of promise. You can only have the mindfulness and the patient endurance or forbearance and the wherewithal to sustain that kind of standard when your mind is free of the influence of alcohol and other drugs. So these five precepts are just your gift to the world. Okay, you're giving a sense of safety and security and trust to those around you. And if there's anything which is like like I don't know, an elixir or maybe with an analogy of a plant. There's anything that's like a fertilizer for a healthy, flourishing relationship as a plant. It's trust, and trust comes from precepts, and trusting, and when you take precepts, so it has to be voluntary. This is another key feature of Buddhist morality. You take precepts on voluntarily, not out of fear and not out of desire, but because you see the value of doing so. And then you learn to train your actions and your speech within those boundaries which you have voluntarily adopted. And then as the time goes on, you go through certain periods where you feel some pressure to abandon the precept, or you feel some temptation, and you're able to maintain those boundaries despite the pressures and temptations. And after a while, you start to feel really good about it, and you have a self-confidence and this self-esteem that you know that no matter how the external situation may change, no matter what other people may say or think, you can sustain these boundaries. You can live within them. And this is extremely supportive of the inner practice of the citta and of panya. So keeping precepts is a training. It's an education, and to keep the precepts well, then you need to be sharp and aware and present, and it's a whole practice in itself. But if you observe how often when your mind gets really spun out in meditation or agitated, or it's so agitated that you don't even want to sit because you just decide it's going to be a waste of time, then how often is it not due to something that you've said or done, or some sila problem that's created this inner turmoil? It's how important it is. So with the practice of the inner practice, then we can't just bypass defilements of mind. We don't even really understand what defilements are simply by reading the word or understanding what it means. We have to have an experience of what the clouding and the sullying and the dirtying of the mind really means. And the way to illuminate the defilements in the mind, particularly the hindrances, is to give the mind a job. You tell the mind just to dwell on one thing, for instance, the breath. And once you do that, then you're going against the stream of the mind and of habits, and all of the hindrances will come out into the light and show themselves and try to prevent you staying with your meditation object. So the point here that I would like to make is that when you meditate and all these hindrances arise in your mind, it doesn't mean that you're a bad meditator or you're not doing the right. That's exactly what's meant to happen. You're creating the conditions in which you can learn how to take care of the mind as to prevent the arising of those hindrances. You're learning what feeds the hindrances, what starves the hindrances. You're learning how to let go of the hindrances. This is the essential work of meditation, and it's very useful. It's not just a waste of time. People say, I'm just with my mind for a short moment, and then it goes off somewhere, and I have to bring it back, and then it goes off somewhere again. Yeah, exactly. That's what it's about. This is the training, and finding a way to encourage the mind to stay with the breath. Because if you develop the wise reflection in the right way, then it gives rise to chanta, interest, enthusiasm in the meditation, and that interest, enthusiasm, and positive relationship with the meditation object means that the mind is much less likely to wander off. And the ability to motivate yourself is one of the key meditation skills that we need to develop in our practice. Even monks and very dedicated meditators are not always inspired, so you have to learn to massage the mind a little bit and know when you're getting a little bit stale and it's a little bit difficult. Then sometimes you've stepped back a bit and bring up your initial inspiration in starting to practice, or recollect teachings that have inspired you, or bring to mind the face and of teachers that you look up to and revere. So you're working with this kind of recalcitrant, difficult, stubborn mind, just very gently and wisely, until that resistance passes away. And so you're learning life skills, meditation skills. So each meditation session, it's not just, how do I get from where I am now to this peaceful state? And then measuring yourself or judging yourself to the extent to which you get to this state that you want to gain. If we are practicing meditation in order to gain a certain state of mind, and you say we call it peace, or we call it whatever you want to call it, and then think that if we can get that state of mind and sustain that state of mind, definitely we'll have got it cracked. This will be good meditation. That is, in traditional terminology, is called practicing for rebirth in heaven. Yeah. So, this I think very interesting. Looking at the introduction of Buddhism into the West in the past 30, 40 years, because like Westerners, you say, we don't want all that kind of cultural trappings. We just want sort of the essence. Like the real thing, the shortcut, and cut to the chase, that kind of idea. But nevertheless, most householder practitioners are always going to have that tendency to seek heavenly rebirth rather than liberation. But when it's couched in this modern language of psychologists, it's like this mindfulness, whatever you do, even if you're eating an orange or you're, whatever you're doing, there's this kind of mindful halo around you, you're sort of contented and happy in whatever you're doing. This is a modern variation on this idea of being reborn in heaven. So the idea that there is some kind of state of eternal mindfulness or eternal peacefulness or something, and that's the goal of practice. This is practice for heaven. So the Buddha is saying that we have to know and be liberated from all attachment to mental states. So whatever the mental state, whatever the aramana, whatever it might be, then we have to seek liberation from identification with it, attachment to it. And this practice, as I said, is a practice of liberation. So the precepts is this giving of sense of safety and trust, but it's a liberation from the bad karma that we would otherwise create through actions and speech. And in the practice of samadhi, we're willing to liberate ourselves from the attachment to hindrances. But when the hindrances pass away, then we have to be careful again not to attach to the peace that arises. So the people have meditators who have very agitated mind, sometimes they have but a strong willpower. So they struggle and strive and struggle and strive. And then sometimes the agitation falls away. And immediately what happens is like, done it, now I want my reward, and just sort of bask in this like state of non-agitation. And what happens? Fall asleep. Yeah. You see, when you think this is what I want, I've got what I wanted, and now I can relax. That's the trap, you see. So, like Ajahn Jayasaro give this sort of counterintuitive teachings when the Westerners would say, "Oh, my mind's so agitated," And so he said, "Well, when it's agitated, you know it's agitated, and when it's not agitated, you know it's not agitated. The point is the knowing." That's very, very difficult to really appreciate. But the word Buddha means what? It means awaken. So this sense of awakening, this is how liberation takes place. It's not from going from one place to another place and you're liberated from it, but it's awakening to its nature. And so in the mindfulness of breathing is awakening to the nature of the inhalation, awakening to the nature of the exhalation. This should always be the main thrust, is that being awake to. And we're trying to increase our capacity to be awake. So that becomes stronger and stronger, so that we can be awake to whatever mental state arises and passes away. We're not grasping onto it, we're not pushing it away, we're awake to its nature. And this is why when people would say, well, okay, that's, you do samatha, but how does samatha go on to vipassana? You get this peaceful state, and what happens then? You just stop. How does that ever become wise, or what do you do next? And Luang Por Chah, Ajahn Chah would say, if you've been developing the meditation correctly, then there cannot be that kind of stagnation, because the seeds of wisdom are there within the meditation at all times. Sometimes there's more emphasis on the calming side and less on the wisdom side, but the two have to be developed together. And if meditation is developed with this balance of mindfulness and clear comprehension and right effort, or atapi, then when the mind becomes still and calm, there's this knowing, there's the Buddha knowing, there's the awakened element within that stillness, which will manifest as the movement of wisdom towards the penetration of the three characteristics. Ready is it's present in it, and in this famous simile, he's trying to explain what it'd be like. He said, "Have you ever seen flowing water?" And I said, "Yes, of course." "Have you ever seen still water?" "Yes." "Well, you ever seen still flowing water?" And so the audience is a bit bemused by this, but he said, "This is what it's like. There is stillness, and there is the flow, and that's the union of samatha and vipassana. That's what happens when the path is of liberation follows through the dana and sila and bhavana, and this emphasis on liberation and wakefulness and being awake to experience and not being distracted and fascinated and obsessed with anything that arises on the path. Because if you're obsessed with bright lights and visions in meditation, that might be very different from someone being obsessed with their football team. But whereas the object is very different, the actual sense and the feeling of obsession is almost identical. So the practice is not one of swapping worldly obsessions for spiritual obsessions, but it's understanding the whole nature of obsession and being liberated from obsession for even the most subtle, even the most profound kind of experience, because any experience that arises and passes away cannot be a source of true happiness. And this is ultimately the meaning of the word dukkha is not nibbana. So you say, well, how can you say someone is like blissful state of jhana is still experiencing dukkha? Because at this stage, dukkha means it's not nibbana. It's very close, but it's still not nibbana. So dukkha follows this whole spectrum. Dukkha from coarse physical pain all the way to this identification with the most subtle kinds of experiences. So it has to be the liberation from all. And it's one Buddhist teacher said, once you realize this, there's nothing there at all that can. It's not that you shouldn't grasp onto anything, but that you can't. And he said it's like you jump out of an airplane and then you realize you have no parachute. He said, but then you realize there's no ground either, so it's okay. Okay, so that's the talk that I would like to offer you this evening. Thank you.